A cold wind swept through the mountains, carrying with it the scent of Lunari and Solari blood. Another fierce battle, another culling. It was not the first, nor would it be the last. The robed figure no longer grieved. It was tragic, yes, but all too human. People fought, died, and killed for what they believed, and the robed figure found that equal parts admirable and pathetic. Yet some lost sight of why they fought, lost sight of themselves. In such times, all they needed was a little push. A lone warrior approached up the mountain trail, moving as though barely alive. The robed figure recognized this warrior, but they were also unfamiliar. "Are you the sage?" he called out, his voice echoing over the winds. "I am many things," the robed figure responded. "But what I am is not the question you should be asking. The correct question is, what are you?" The warrior stared up at the sage, and though a golden helm masked much of his face, hints of sorrow and confusion played in his eyes. "I am lost." "Evidently." The sage sighed and shook their head, beckoning the warrior closer. Then they turned and made their way into a small shack, holding the door open just long enough for their guest to enter. "Sit." The warrior did as told, resting his divine shield and spear by the doorway and removing his helmet. The shack was small and dimly lit by the glow of a single torch suspended from the ceiling. The walls were lined with shelves containing all manner of ancient texts and trinkets. The warrior's eyes glanced over them briefly before returning to the robed figure in front of him. The sage was covered head to toe in tattered robes, their face hidden by a curious mask decorated with intricate patterns. "What is your name?" the sage asked. "Atreus." "So you know that much." The sage sat opposite of Atreus, handing him a cup of warm tea. "But a name is a fleeting thing, as you well know." Atreus took the cup gratefully and sipped its contents. It was bland, but it warmed him well enough after his long trek. "Thank you." "What is it that you seek?" The sage's voice was cold and emotionless, yet Atreus could feel a judgmental glare coming from behind the mask. After mulling over his words for a moment, the warrior shook his head. "Guidance," he answered at last. "I am tired, so very tired, and No," the sage cut off. "It's not fatigue that plagues you. It's fear." "Fear," Atreus muttered. "Perhaps you are right. I fear what this world has become, what I have become. Gods and demons and undead kings. Runeterra is succumbing to madness, and I thought I was strong enough to fight them, strong enough to stop them, but I cannot." "And why can't you?" "Because I am a man." Atreus gripped his cup tightly. "A mortal, powerless to resist their whims. I once held the strength to fight them, but now it is gone." The sage sighed and shook their head. "It is not gone. You've merely stifled it, locked it deep within yourself." "Why?" "Because it nearly destroyed me. It nearly destroyed the world. How can I wield that power, knowing it will consume me?" "You fear Pantheon's return." "Yes." Atreus' voice was barely a whisper. You're a fool." The sage shook their head again. "Pantheon is gone, A dead god poses no threat. "He is not gone!" Atreus shouted, clutching his head. "The ruined king brought him back. Once again, I was forced to turn my own spear against all I hold dear. I was powerless against the black mist, and now I am powerless to fight our foes atop Targon. And yet," his voice lowered again as he recalled Eula, her anger, her tears, her words. "And yet there are those who still need me." "Indeed there are," the sage nodded. "But if you hope to help them, you must first stop lying to yourself." Atreus looked to the sage in confusion. "What do you... Do you know what the black mist is, Atreus?" "It is Viego's power, the power of undeath." "Not quite." The sage shook their head. "Listen, Atreus. There is not a soul on Runeterra without a trace of darkness inside. We all have fears, doubts, regrets, and grudges. Everyone harbors something inside themselves they seek to repress. For the half-dragon, it was her bestial nature. For the enlightened one, it was her own past lives. The black mist reaches deep into one's soul and brings the worst parts of ourselves to the forefront, the parts of ourselves that we try the hardest to keep hidden away. Yet for me," Atreus began, "it was the war god." "Yes, but not the one you know." The sage raised a finger and pointed at Atreus. "It was you, or rather, what you fear becoming." "I..." Atreus struggled to find the words to respond, to deny that the creature who waged war in the black mist was him. But the sage continued. "You are more than a man, Atreus, and you have been for a long time. That you deny this is exactly why Viego laid claim to you so easily." "No!" Atreus stood up, shaking his head. "I am just a man, nothing more." "Really?" The sage remained seated, their hands folded in their lap. "Is a mere man capable of driving back a Darkin, of felling the demon Camphord, of challenging the Magus Ascendant in his own domain? Plenty of ordinary men have tried, and they fared much worse than you." "And yet, what have my efforts amounted to?" Atreus glared at his helmet with disdain. "These creatures still threaten to destroy our world. I have fought for so long, but my fight will never be done." "There will always be conflict, Atreus." The sage rose to their feet. "Just as there will always be a god to preside over it. Pantheon took that mantle in the past, but now it belongs to you." "Are you saying I must become a god?" Atreus spat on the floor, shaking his head. "The gods are cruel and uncaring. To them, mortals are nothing but pawns. I refuse to be like them. I refuse to wage war merely for the sake of it." "Is there any edict that says a god must be cruel? What law claims that you must tread the same path as your predecessor?" The sage stepped forward. "You've long said that you were nothing more than a soldier, but no ordinary soldier could leap to the heavens and come crashing down with the force of a comet. You say that you place your trust in steel rather than the stars." The sage gestured to Atreus's weapons by the doorway. "But the steel you carry was tempered in starfire." Atreus glanced down again. "I wield the god's power, but that does not..." "Yes, you do." The sage took another step forward, prodding Atreus's chest. "Celestial might runs through your veins. The constellation of the warrior burns in the sky when you take the battlefield. You are a god, Atreus, but you are also a man. The other aspects are still merely vessels, but the God that resided in you is gone, slain by he who would call himself the World Ender. In his place, you now stand, a link between mortal and divine. Accept your nature, Atreus, before it consumes you. Suddenly, darkness filled the shack. Atreus felt his heart nearly stop as dread washed over him. The sage's figure was obscured by the black mist, and in their place, a figure with sickly green skin stepped forward, wielding a spectral spear. You! Atreus rushed for his weapons, but the war god was faster. A single blow from his shield, fashioned like a twisted face, sent Atreus tumbling to the ground. Say my name. Pantheon. Atreus scrambled back in an effort to put some distance between himself and the fallen deity. The war god lunged again, aiming his spear for Atreus' chest. Atreus narrowly evaded the blow, rolling to the side. He could not find his weapons, nor the exit. His eyes scanned the darkness, but there was no trace of the sage. The war god offered no reprieve, pinning Atreus to the wall with his shield. Say my name! Atreus grit his teeth, struggling with all his might to break free. The war god's eyes burned with the unearthly glow of ruination, and yet there was something else in them. A hatred, a resentment that seemed sharper than even the spear in his grasp. That same spear was poised to strike at any moment, but as Atreus tried to pry himself free, memories began to flood his mind. Atreus recalled the days he spent sparring with Pylus, beaten and bloodied as he tried again and again to get the better of his battle brother. He remembered watching innocents slain by barbarians, and his prayers for help falling on deaf ears. He remembered scaling the mountain, and a single question entered his mind. Why? Why did we seek the power of an aspect? More memories came. He remembered watching Pylus die, watching his own body do battle with Atrox as his mind and will were stifled. Atreus remembered Eula tending to him after the Darkin's near-fatal blow, and later, severing that Darkin's arm. He remembered standing against a being of twisted power in Narimazeth, clutching the dying warrior Asose in his arms. And he remembered being impaled by Viego's blade. In that moment, fear and helplessness overcame him. He remembered commanding soldiers of the Black Mist against the living, lashing out against warriors of light. He remembered striking down foe after foe, only to have them rise again in Viego's name. That's right. It was I who killed them, not Pantheon. The war god tightened his grip on the spear, ready to impale his captive. What is my name? Atreus. The warrior allowed his own name to roll off his lips. You are what I will become, if I ever allow power to consume me. You are the hatred of gods, including myself. But Atreus felt something surge within him, and pressed both palms against the shield. No, longer! Atreus felt the divine power swelling in his breast. His eyes glowed with a heavenly light as he shoved the war god back. In his hands, Atreus' own celestial weapons manifested themselves. His ruined self cried out, once more aiming his spear at Atreus' chest. We must wage war! Atreus made no move to block or evade the coming blow, shaking his head. I am done waging war against myself. Just as the war god's spear struck his chest, the weapon stopped. His ruined visage shimmered, then burst into light. Gone was the warrior of the Black Mist. and in its place stood a warrior with shimmering golden armor and skin like the night sky. I am a god. Atreus nodded. And I am a man. The darkness faded, as did the war god's visage. Atreus found himself standing in the hut once more, the sage standing across from him. They tilted their head, intrigued. Do you understand what you must do? Atreus was silent for a moment, his eyes moving to the dim fire that hung just overhead. I must see the aspect of the sun. The sage nodded, watching as Atreus donned his helmet and took up his arms once again. You are a god, and you are a man. But, above all else, you are yourself. Never forget that. I won't. Atreus nodded back to the sage. Never again. Thank you, sage. With that, Atreus stepped back out into the frigid winds with renewed purpose, closing the door behind him. The sage chuckled to themselves, looking into the dim fire above. You will be tested again, Atreus. Let us hope, for all our sakes, you can overcome the trials that lay ahead.